Good. Hello, 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 everyone. We are going to go ahead and get started. On behalf of Busboys and Poets, thank you so much for joining us for this discussion with author Dr. Ashley D. Farmer about her latest release, Queen Mother, Black Nationalism, Reparations, and the Untold Story of Audley Moore. We can clap and celebrate. That's what we're here for. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Our Busboys and Poets servers are going to be helping us out throughout the entire program with putting in orders. They're waving. Thank you so much. Also, the heat/AC in this room can be a bit loud turning on and off, so just be aware of that, and we'll just keep going with the program. I also want to remind you that there will be a Q&A after the discussion, and a book signing after the program, and Queen Mother is here available for purchase. And now a little bit about the book we'll be discussing here tonight. In the world of Black radical politics, the name Audley Moore commands unquestioned respect. Across the 9 decades of her life, Queen Mother Moore distinguished herself as a leading progenitor of Black nationalism, the founder of the modern reparations movement, and from her Philadelphia and Harlem homes, a mentor to some of America's most influential Black activists. And yet, she is far less remembered than many of her peers and proteges, Marcus Garvey, Malcolm X, and Muhammad Ahmad, to name just a few, and the ephemera of her life are either lost or plundered. In Queen Mother, celebrated writer and historian Ashley D. Farmer restores Moore's faded portrait, delivering the first ever definitive account of her life and enduring legacy. Deeply researched and richly detailed, Queen Mother is more than just a biography of an American icon. It's a narrative history of 20th century Black radicalism told through the lens of the woman whose grit and determination sustained the movement. And now a little bit about Dr. Farmer. Dr. Ashley D. Farmer is an award-winning writer, researcher, and cultural analyst who explores Black history and its implications today. Her first book, Remaking Black Power, was shortlisted for numerous awards. Farmer's ideas and insights have appeared in numerous venues, including Harper's Bazaar, NPR, The Washington Post, and Teen Vogue. Farmer is an associate professor at the University of Texas at Austin. Now I'll pass it off to her. Thank you.
Good afternoon, evening. What part of the day are we in? I'm in the evening. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone. It's nice to see you all here. Thank you for coming out today, which is a Thursday at 6 o'clock, which I know is tough, coupled with, I know once it gets dark early, we all just want to get in the bed. So I'm here to make it worth your while. As she mentioned, I'm Ashley Farmer, and I'm a historian of Black women's history and radical politics. And today I'm going to talk just a little bit about how the making of Queen Mother Moore, a little bit about her life, and then hopefully this will generate some great questions for you. I'll also share a couple of passages from the book in the process. So as you heard, I started writing about Black women in radical politics with my first book called Remaking Black Power, which is a history of Black women in the Black Power movement. And one of the things that was really incredible about this was I interviewed almost 40 people, and every single person had a story about Queen Mother Moore, right? It was the first time they had heard somebody talk about reparations. It was the first time that they had heard somebody talk about Marcus Garvey. It was the first time somebody had told them about what it was like to organize through the 1920s and the Great Depression. And I thought to myself, how could I have never heard of somebody like this? So I go on the internet and I start looking, and I realize that part of the issue is that there's virtually nothing there about her, right? No books, no articles, maybe 1 or 2 blog posts at most that are taking place. And I soon figured out why. When I started to go as an historian and look up to try to find actual research or primary sources about her, there was nothing there. And I couldn't figure out why, especially because when I was a kid, I had seen this picture of her. This picture was in a book called I Dream a World. It was a picture that included, or a book that included portraits of tons and tons of famous Black women, from Alice Walker to Betty Shabazz to Rosa Parks. And so I thought to myself, you know, where is all of this stuff that I see pictured here? Because clearly this was a woman who was important enough to be included in the Pantheon of Greats. And clearly this was a woman that knew of her importance enough that she was collecting her own stuff and her own materials, right? So where did it all go? And truly, stories abound about what happened. Some people told me that it was buried in New Iberia, where she was from, which is about 2 hours outside of New Orleans, and that they would be my guide if I wanted them to take me for the cost of a plane ticket, right? Then there were others who said that people stole it piece by piece once she moved out of this particular apartment and into a nursing home in the last years of your life. And then there's still other moments where I have been in places like the Schaumburg and Harlem, and some people have stood up and told me that they are wearing these exact bangles and this exact, outfit that she has, right? So the point here is that no one quite knows. When I queried or asked other people, everybody had maybe one artifact, two artifacts, right? So I spent the better part of 10 years digging up different kinds of information about her. Anytime that I was researching my other book, I would come across something and I would drop it in a folder, I would drop it in a binder in the hopes at one point of getting a critical mass. And after about a decade, I felt like I could finally turn my life towards it. So I wanted to talk a little bit about why I think that Queen Mother has been left out of our history of the Black freedom struggle, and share a little bit from the book about that. And then after that, talk about what our world might look like if we're to try to understand her as part of this picture. Because I truly believe that you can't really understand exactly how we got here or have any real excitement or possibility about where we can go without understanding Queen Mother Moore's life. So Queen Mother Moore was born in 1898 in New Iberia, Louisiana. And just to give you a reference point for those of you who are becoming hopefully new fans of her today, she was born in 1898 and she died in 1997. Right? So she lived almost the entirety of the 20th century, so a real subject, a real life. And when she was in New Iberia, she was kind of living for a Black girl. She was born to a father who had come out of slavery and Reconstruction. He had land. He owned his own businesses. He was able to buy a house. He was able to send her and her two younger sisters to Black Catholic private school in New Orleans. So they were part of what you would say the Black elite of New Orleans and the South writ large. So this is a really unlikely story about how somebody that is growing up in that kind of upbringing becomes one of our foremost Black nationalist leaders by the end of the 20th century. And what happens is that she loses both her father and her mother when she's a teenager, and this plunges her into destitution. She is only able to survive by quitting school. She only made it to about the 3rd grade, and cleaning basically white women's homes to stay afloat as a domestic worker. But this was a real shock and a real change to her because, as she calls it, she was being raised to be, quote, a bourgeois little stinker. That was her term, not mine. But that should tell you what, she thought her life was going to be by comparison of how it was. And but everything changed when Marcus Garvey came to town in the early 1920s. So at this point, she's living and working every day trying to make ends meet. She marries a Jamaican man who introduces her to Garvey. Can I get a show of hands? Do we know Marcus Garvey? Yes, okay, my kind of people. Sometimes I got to give a little primer, And so I want to share a little bit from the book about when she first meets and sees Garvey. I guess I'm going to have to put this back here. No. We'll see. Can we do it like this? Will that work? Okay. On a muggy summer evening in 1922, Audley Moore made her way toward the Longshoremen's Hall on the corner of Jackson Avenue and Franklin Street. She expected the night air to be hot, but she was sweating even more than usual this evening. Audley was packing some heat of her own. She had a .45 caliber pistol stashed in her bra and another in her purse. She also had a briefcase full of extra bullets at her side. If it was the fight the New Orleans police wanted, then she was ready to give it to them. Audley rounded the corner and came upon a building that had served as a rallying and radicalizing space for Black New Orleanians for decades. It was an iconic building, angular, white, and imposing, with darkly painted rectangular windows and wide double doors. A crowd had already gathered outside. Domestic workers, store owners, homemakers, and longshoremen were all filing in to hear New Orleans' newest visitor deliver a speech. He'll speak tonight, Believe me, he'll speak tonight, Audley heard people mutter as she said her hellos. She nodded in agreement and made her way inside. The air in the hall felt as thick as it did outside. Everyone had heard what had happened the night before, when Marcus Garvey had come to New Orleans. Afraid of his penchant for rousing black crowds, he made a name for himself delivering speeches about the storied history of Africa and proclaiming that the time had come for black people around the world to come together and fight white supremacy. The police had blocked Garvey from speaking by issuing an injunction against the meeting. His followers had contested the move, and word was he had won. Audley hoped the rumors were true. She watched nervously as the police came in the longshoremen's hall. They filed in, down the center aisle, and lined themselves up, each man on a row of benches. Audley exchanged knowing looks with anxious others in the audience and shifted in her seat. Everybody was waiting to see who was going to make the next move, Garvey or the police. Cheers rang out as the Black Nationalists entered, walked down the center aisle, and took to the stage. My friends, I want to apologize to you for not speaking last night, but the mayor of New Orleans permitted himself to be used as a stooge by the chief of police, he said to Cheers. The police jumped up. They were poised to attack. Black New Orleanians, who like others across the Deep South, have been bearing arms in self-defense since slavery, responded in kind. Like a wave, their guns went up. Audley joined, drawing her little pearled handgun from her pocketbook and a smaller one from inside her dress and hoisting them in the air. And just as a pause, the few times that she tells this on video, she does the finger guns. So you gotta imagine me doing the finger guns while I do this. And she says, "Speak, Garvey, speak. Speak, Garvey, speak." The crowd chanted in unison. Audley watched in astonishment as the police filed out of there like little puppy dogs wagging their tails. She stashed her guns and settled in to hear a speech that would transform her life. So, look at this. About to have a good time tonight. Queen Mother Moore also liked her wine, so this is fitting. So I love that story because it becomes the cornerstone of her transformation from this bourgeois little stinker that she was talking about before to a black nationalist. And why is this? Because she's 19, 20 years old. She's watched the white police in New Orleans kill and lynch black folk with reckless abandon. And here was a moment where black people were standing up in unison and combating the police. And then when she sat down, she heard for the first time in her life that she was descended from kings and queens, that she should be proud of how she looked with her hair and with her skin, and that black people all over the world were organizing to fight for a better world. And so she joined Garvey's movement, which in kind of total called for black people to have control over their communities, for them to have self-determination, the right to determine one's future, and to bear arms for self-defense if desired. And in Garvey's version of the movement, we would also go back to Africa as well. And this captivated her for the better part of the 20th century. And I would say she was one of the foremost Garveyites. But here I think it's also important to talk about what we mean when we talk about black nationalism beyond that, and how it might be similar or different than those who we might know in the pantheon of black leaders that were organizing for integration. So I want to share just a big moment about that. Black nationalism conjures up poignant images in the American psyche. Malcolm X peering out from behind a window, brandishing a rifle. The Black Panthers clad in black leather jackets, black berets with raised fists exclaiming, "Fight the power." But few speak of the substance behind the symbolism. Most see black nationalism, both as a political philosophy and a movement, as violent, incoherent, and nihilistic inverse of the civil rights movement, integration's evil twin. Nothing could be further from the truth. Civil rights and black nationalist organizers had the same goal. They wanted people to live free, happy, and self-fulfilled lives, even if they differed on how to achieve that. Civil rights activists believed that this was best attained through full integration, for black people to assimilate into the American life, culture, and politics. Black nationalists like Moore argued that the physical, political, cultural, and economic separation from white people was the only plausible solution to black people's long suffering. Civil rights organizers fought to end the legal and cultural segregation, voting rights, and black political power using largely nonviolent tactics, but not exclusively. Black nationalists advocated for black folks' right to govern themselves and defend themselves from attacks against their reputations, their bodies, and their communities. For many nationalists, taking up arms was a necessary resort. Yet strict observance of ideological lines was nearly impossible in the heart of day-to-day struggles. Throughout the 20th century, these two strands of the Black freedom movement were constantly intertwined. Activists crisscrossed their ideological borders, simultaneously joining organizations on both sides of the alleged divide and sharing protest strategies and grassroots groups. They often locked arms with each other at boycotts and in marches. Whether they were well-known leaders or rank-and-file organizers, throughout the 20th century, nationalists and integrationists spurred each other on, transforming debates about racial justice and pushing the American government to make good on its calls for liberty and justice for all. And I always like to share that because I do think that if any of us do learn about Black nationalism, it is very much in that kind of Malcolm to Martin dichotomy, if you learn it all. And it's important to understand that Moore, just like many of her other nationalists like her, were very interested in a separate black nation state, but this didn't mean that they never worked alongside some of the luminaries that we know today, and that's part of why she is so important and such an interesting activist. So if we're thinking about why we don't know much about Moore, certainly it's this thing that she was an unlikely black nationalist. But the second idea behind it is that she had some somewhat fringe ideas that have become less so, and some that many of us would probably think are still out there. For example, Moore was considered part of the mother and the founder of the modern reparations movement. She began organizing at the group of women in the late 1950s and early 1960s who were organizing against black women not getting their welfare checks and against black men who were imprisoned in Angola, often set to die for the wrongfully accused raping of white women. And in that process, she realized that black people not only would suffer during slavery, but also had spent another 100 years, right, dealing with the economic, social, cultural, physical, mental issues that slavery and Jim Crow had wrought. And so she began to look around for ideas about repayment. And with this group of black women that included her two sisters, they began to think about what it would look like for us to actually get a paycheck from the American government. And so I want you to imagine I'm going to tell you what happens next, and it's really quite a feat. It's the late 1950s, early 1960s, so we're talking the start of the sit-in movement, right? The start of the boycotts. We're getting rised up or getting close to the March on Washington. Integration and calls for integration are at their fervor. And then I want you to imagine basically a middle-aged black woman getting in a car and going from one city to another city to another city, talking to any civic group, church, sorority, anybody that would listen about the idea of repayment. And this is a time when just the term reparations was not something that was in anybody's vocabulary. And in addition to that, she's writing out ideas for how we could possibly get repayment. Some of them plausible, some of them not so plausible, right? But nonetheless, right, she's experimenting with this idea. And it does eventually catch on. So you have folks, for example, in Los Angeles who file a claim for reparations. And these are middle-class black folks that are talking about reparations at ladies' luncheons and teas. And then you've got folks in Oakland and San Francisco who are down with her idea that we should be using reparations to start a separate black nation. And they begin to do that work. So one of the things that I think is really amazing about Queen Mother Moore is she was very much a let a million flowers bloom. She planted the seeds of reparations everywhere and anywhere that somebody would listen. And she let it grow and nurture it as they saw fit. It didn't have to necessarily 100% agree with her version of what was going to take place for that to happen. And I think one of the most poignant examples of her influence is Charles Ogletree. Do folks know Charles Ogletree, the civil rights giant? He credits, for example, Queen Mother Moore with teaching him about reparations. He says that she's the first person to introduce him to it in the early 1970s, and that he kept coming back and learning about it. And as we know, he was one of the folks that was most successful at filing lawsuits for reparations for victims, for example, of the Tulsa Massacre and beyond. So that's just one example of how, even in our kind of common day, we see the influence of Queen Mother Moore. But at the time when folks were recording the Black Freedom Movement, she was definitely, on the outskirts or the outside. Another reason is that even though she would work with folks that were integrationists, she was, in truth, a nationalist. And by that I mean that she believed that there could be no way that black people could succeed in the United States. She believed that America as we know it is a failed project. It's a failed experiment in democracy, because we cannot function in a place where the whole ideal, the bedrock of the country, is built on the exclusion of black people and then expect people to be in it. So she was also incredibly supportive of groups that tried to start their own nation here on American soil, none more so than the Republic of New Africa. Do we know about the Republic of New Africa at all? All right, I'm going to tell you a little short story. Anyone standing at the corner of 14th Street and Warren Avenue must have stopped and stared when they saw Moore and her African-clothed compatriots crossing the street. On Sunday, March 31st, 1968, just a handful of months before she returned to Philadelphia for the third Black Power Summit, Queen Mother Moore filed into Detroit's 20 Grand Motel. Others at the intersection were headed to the neighboring club of the same name, with plans to grab a cocktail before visiting its bowling alley or hearing Ella Fitzgerald in the Gold Room. Dressed in their Sunday evening best and looking for a good time, club goers couldn't have known about the insurrection taking place next door. Moore found her seat among black folk milling about in the black-owned motel's meeting room, where more than 500 black radicals and thinkers from across the black left spent the last 3 days hunkered down at the Black Government Convention, debating the next steps in the black liberation movement. Suddenly, a group pressed to the front of the room and unfurled a document. We, the people of Black America, declare ourselves free and independent of this jurisdiction of the United States of America, began. The crowd was stunned as the group pressed on. Some shifted in their seats. It was all well and good to talk about the failures of the American government or to daydream about a black utopia. But renouncing U.S. citizenship and supporting black secession, these were serious, even treasonous acts. An uneasiness started to grow among the conference goers. Were they truly willing to risk their lives and livelihoods for this cause? Moore, for one, knew where she fell. Hallelujah, she called above the murmurs of the crowd. Hallelujah, I have lived to see the day. The age activist rose from her seat, lifted her hands to the heavens, and strode to the front of the room as if leading a procession. Moore bent down, grabbed the pen, and signed her name in loopy cursive, and then turned to see if who, if any, would follow. Numerous young men and women rushed to the front, lining up to join her. If a 70-year-old grandmother could risk her hide for black liberation, surely then they could too. So I love that story because when I talk to people about that particular moment, everybody says that, quite frankly, they were scared shitless. They did not think that the people were going to actually declare themselves a separate nation and begin the process of separating from the United States. But they felt that if Moore could do it, then anybody could. The Republic of New Africa was one of the most foremost examples of that as a success story. They formed a new government, they created diplomats, they got land in Mississippi, and they began the process of building what they would call their black nation. They developed a capital, they developed land for farming, and they developed a reparations claim, arguing that they should get the money from the United States government to begin this process. As you can imagine, the feds did not love it. And so it did not take long for basically them to be raided and gunned down a few years after they started. But for Queen Mother Moore, things like this meant that there was enough of a possibility, enough of a capability. Black people wanted this for themselves, and she continued to push for it well after the end of the Republic of New Africa. And then finally, I want to say that a key reason that I think Moore has been left out is because she was somebody that was hunted by the federal government. Queen Mother Moore has an FBI file that spans from the 1920s to the 1970s. And that means that for the better part of 50 years, agents got up every day, tracked her. I'm talking, if you look at the file, you see she went to this meeting, she talked to this person, right? They've bugged her phones. They've bugged her kids' phone, right? They have actually gone and taken pictures of her and then gone through the newspaper, found every instance in which she appears, cut out the newspaper scrap, and then put it into the FBI file, right? And so on the one hand, this is perhaps the most complete accounting of her life we have because we've lost all of this stuff. And in the Q&A, if you want to talk about maybe the ethics or the challenges of writing about somebody from their FBI file, because that's a whole other bag of tricks. But also it means that, you know, you have somebody who's been hunted and is trying to disappear sometimes. Even though I also tell a story in the book of her directly confronting the agents that are following her. She got tired of the men just falling behind. She was like, come here, sit down, let's just talk. And then she goes into the FBI office. She takes her sister as her lawyer, and she just rails at the FBI agents. It's absolutely hilarious. So I say that to say, though, that what we might have had in terms of stories about her, what folks might have kept, it was dangerous to keep it sometimes. I see literal books from the 1930s and 40s where people are called before the House of Un-American Activities, and one of the questions is, did you know Audley Moore? Did you organize with Audley Moore? So she was, in many places, a dangerous person to be around. So I think a lot of people did not keep her stuff in that way. And then finally, I think we don't know a lot about her because she's not easy to classify. We like our Black freedom movement leaders young, male, and stuck in time, right? And what do I mean by that? Obviously, the young part, when you think about people that are organizing, you think about youth, right? When you think about the civil rights movement, the Black Power movement, everybody's young. And sometimes they're young because they're killed in their prime. Sometimes these folks are grown up and around, but we stop talking about them after that one moment in time. We don't see them, obviously, as elders. Second, obviously, the male part is self-explanatory. But third is that, she moved through every major moment in the 20th century. I joke that she's almost Gumpian in the sense that it literally, when you read the book, she's, with Paul Robeson and Claudia Jones in the Harlem Renaissance, right? Then she's over here emailing, my goodness, yikes, it's been a long day. Writing a letter to W.B. Du Bois. Then she's organizing with Mary McLeod Bethune in the 1940s. Then she's mentoring Malcolm X, who used to come to her Philadelphia home and sit at her feet in the 1960s. And then she's at the Million Man March in 1995. There is literally no moment in Black American history in the 20th century where she is not there and she is not trying to make her mark. So then what do you walk away with when you read Moore's life in this entirety the way it's been reconstructed? First, you realize that the Black freedom movement is not easily categorized, right? And it's largely being sustained by everyday Black women that you do not know, largely at the grassroots level. One thing you won't find here are a lot of major organizations that you know. Moore is moving from place to place in grassroots groups and doing what she can and moving us along on reparations and nationalism from outside the mainframe. I think secondly, you realize that this is a story about a Black woman who just stayed the course. I want you to think about how hard it must be to get up every day and want a vision of Black liberation that you know is unlikely just in general, but also certainly unlikely in your lifetime. Right? And what kind of stick-to-itiveness, what kind of commitment it takes to stay the course for that for more than 100 years, or close to 100 years. So I think about the fact that maybe even if you don't agree with her politics or can't get down with the idea of Black nationalism, she's a great example of setting your values or your compass towards something and then moving with that no matter how the world moves and under your feet. And realizing in this particular moment where I think a lot of us feel like we don't know what's happening, the world is not matching our values, it reminds you to stay true to what you want and you do, and typically folks will come back around, and if not, you will find your tribe of folks, right? And I think that is where I'm going to stop because I think we're a little short on time. Okay, I'll stop there. Great.
And now we'll open it up for questions. You can raise your hand and we'll come pass you the mic. Thank you. Starting us off.
Hi, Ashley. I have maybe one or two questions. So, do you think that one of the reasons, and you kind of did say that, is as a Black woman that she was kind of she really didn't get the press that W.E. Du Bois and the rest of the folks got, and was that because of the African American men who were kind of making sure that she wasn't going to rise but so high, or is that something reflective of white America?
I love this question because Queen Mother Moore was called a lot of things, but I'm going to be quite honest, her gender politics were not great, right? They were very conservative, and I think this is important because it shows you how she navigated this world of Black men. Queen Mother Moore believed in polygamy. She believed that men should be the head of organizations. and she promoted black men as the head of household. Now, my girl was married 3 times and was leading every organization, so she was not practicing what she was preaching, right? But this is my point, right? She understood that if she trafficked in that kind of language, then she was never going to be on the outside of groups that were largely male-led. And then let's add in another part of that. By the time that, say, Black Power comes around, right, she is in her 60s and 70s. And at this point, most people would have said, no, no, this is a young man's game. Get out of here. But by becoming Queen Mother Moore, which is a title that was bestowed upon her, but by really leaning into that, she moves from somebody that may have, quote, like, aged out of the movement to a movement elder. Right? And that makes sure that she's a mentor, and that makes sure that she's always in the circles, and she's always invited, right? And she's always has a seat at the table. So I think that, and because of that, I was able to talk to tons of people for the book who remember her, because she was still moving and shaking into the 80s and 90s. So it was clear that the activist community remembered her. And black folks within that community remembered her. But I think in large part because she played the game very well. So I think this is more of a white American thing. I'll also add that, you know, she didn't really write much down. She was a thinker on the go. And we always privilege folks that are writing, you know, books and tomes and treaties. She was a poet, a very, very bad one. But I include the poetry in the book. So you will get a good giggle out of that. She also loved to sing, and she was a horrible singer as well. And so, but I say that to say is that she didn't have so much of a written record. And white or black, we tend to privilege that. So I also think that's why she hasn't been remembered as well.
Okay. We can come back to you as well.
Hey, Ashley. So in doing your research, what was the most surprising thing you found?
That's a good question. So there are women that are like black club women. Do folks know what I mean by that? Like the NAACW, these are, you know, upper class black women who are organized, I mean, doing very important work, organizing for voting rights, civil rights, anti-lynching rights, but they're sophisticated ladies, right? And during World War II, she joins them. You know, these are the ladies that lunch, right? And so I was like, I know that's not who I think it is, right? I mean, you would never think of somebody that was, you know, espousing having a separate black nation being with these folks and folks like Mary McLeod, you know, very center, progressive, traditional. And this taught me 2 things. One is that, you know, during World War II, you can't be but so anti-American and survive, right? So this is a real matter of kind of political expediency. But also it made me realize that she was the type of woman that would work with anybody. Like a group didn't have to have like Black Nationalism in its title for her to do that. And one of the ways in which she was so savvy is that she would go and organize with these women because they were doing good work. They're helping everyday black women get better lives. But while she was in there, she would just lob something like, you ever wonder why if we're ever going to get the chance to vote? Or like, you know, one of her things was that we, in the end of the Civil War, didn't necessarily choose to be Americans. We were kind of inscripted into America through the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. But she was like, nobody asked folks if they wanted to stay here or not and really do this. And so it shows that she understood that you can be a part of a group or a coalition for a moment and do good work, and that doesn't have to last forever. It shows that you can organize with people that, you know, think about it like a Venn diagram, have enough overlap with you, but don't have to be one and the same. But also, played right, could also be an opportunity to bring more people to your side. But I was absolutely stunned to find her there. One of the most interesting things is that she helped get the council house that still exists on Vermont. Yeah. And so there's a picture of her like this with the ladies at lunch. And the newspaper, because she was part of the group that raised the money for that space, right? So, you know, but then at night she would go on the street corner and be like, leave America. And so I just thought that was very interesting, but it really taught me about the nuances in her approach to organizing.
Okay, right here.
Thank you. Thank you, Ashley. And I'm so excited to pick up the full book because the parts you read were just beautiful. So I had a question that kind of jumps off of your last answer. It seems from what I've read and from what you've said that she's sort of relentlessly positive in her interactions with other black activists. there's not a lot of sectarianism in her. And I'm curious if that plays out through the rest of the book that I haven't read, right? Because, you know, she starts off her political career with Garvey, and it's a very specific type of Black nationalism. She kind of has this swan song with the Million Man March, and so it looks similar, but it's actually substantively very different. And I'm curious if you get critiques that come in about all these different movements that she's been a part of in between.
Yeah, so one of the things I think is really great about her story and getting to tell the longue durée is that I think sometimes she thinks she veered too far, right? There's a chapter there called Heartbreak, where she ends up having to break up, for example, with the Communist Party. And she talks about how not only like a physical like reaction, but like a depression, a waywardness that comes from feeling like she trusted some of those folks too much and was betrayed by them because they were not as committed to Black nationalism and Black self-determination as she thought they were, right? And then in other moments, I think it must have been tough for her. She doesn't let off the gas, but she's certainly frustrated that people won't catch up with her, right? And I would say that, like, you know, when I say this is in 2025, this may be a failed project that's never going to work, there's some people that are like, maybe, right? And I think she understood that early and was like, guys, get with the program. This thing is not going to work. And so she was often frustrated with people not really coming to terms or kind of breaking up with their ideas of America. She also felt people were very indoctrinated into not white nationalism like we talk about it today, but into, you know, the idea that you could be an American. And she was actually refusing that. But throughout the course of the book, I talk about moments where she does feel betrayed, or as she describes it, just simply heartbroken by the fact that people are not living up to what she thought they were collectively working on.
Okay, see this person back there, and then we'll come over to you.
Would you like to introduce yourself before you speak? Thanks.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. Ashley, you might not remember me, but I'm Saint Cyr. I met you in St. Louis while you were researching my great-grandmother, Queen Mother Moore.
This is Saint Cyr,
yes.
named after her father.
Yeah, I'm her great-grandson. I have a question for you. I wanted to know how long did it take you to write the book? It's like 100 years of research in this one book. So how long did it take? Kind of so.
I would say that like the idea came into my mind probably like 2007, 2008. But I would say that so it probably took me from like 2007, 2008 to about 2017, 2018 to be able to like get enough stuff to write it. And I was writing other things while I was doing this. And then I would say I probably started writing in earnest about 2017, and then it came out last week. So a very an incredibly long time.
Well, congratulations again. Hold on.
Thank you.
Congratulations on the book.
Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Mark Davis.
And this is my father.
I'm his father. So I married his mother, Audley, and yes. So I attended Temple. I was a student athlete there. I played basketball. So I met Audley there, and after we finished school, she had to go back, and when I left, I went off to the NBA, but we had a beautiful son. And I remember when she was expecting, we would go out to Booth Maternity Hospital. We took a class at Temple about childhood, but I remember Queen Mother coming to town when she found out that her granddaughter was pregnant. So Queen Mother came to town, and I had seen her speak in Philly, New York. You know, I knew her, so when she found out, she came to town, and she summoned me up there. And boy, it was great. I mean, we had such fun, food. Her son, his grandfather, we drank, and Audley and I got engaged, and Queen Mother did not leave Philly until we were married. And that was like, I loved her so much. She was just so nice throughout the whole relationship. I am so blessed, and my son and I have so much fun. His mother's father is still living, Tom Warner. He's about. Oh, he was here yesterday? No, not here. Oh, okay, yeah. He's a great guy. 96. We still hang out and have a good time. And she is, I love celebrating her. I wouldn't miss this for anything. Thank you very much. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, now this person right here.
Thank you so much. I'm curious about the FBI file. I remember you had mentioned that. Sort of, what's it like having to tell the story of someone sort of, and you can only see through the eyes of the people who are basically persecuting her? What are the sort of challenges that come with that in the writing process?
Yeah, so it's really interesting. I mean, like I said, I read the first book about Black women and Black power, and then this book. So, I mean, I'm sure I have an FBI. From the amount of FBI files I have, I think I also probably have an FBI file. But for the women that I study, like Moore and others, because one, we don't treat Black women's history with the seriousness that we should, and because they were trying not to be found because they were being surveilled so much, if you want to start kind of documenting one of these women's lives, that is like where you start with a basic timeline, right? I mean, for example, she's born in 1898 in Louisiana. They didn't even give Black people birth certificates. How, the FBI found out where she was born. You know what I mean? And so on the one hand, it gives you maybe like the basic architecture, but you have to understand that, the feds are some liars. So what it can do for you is give you a kind of a basic architecture. I was able to like triangulate where she might have been or where she might have moved or who she was in contact with that way. But, obviously any story that they tell her, you've got to go and verify a lot, because the goal here is to send this up to Hoover for you to get an indictment, et cetera, to arrest her, jail her, or in the case of when she goes to the office, try to flip her as an informant. Because, this kind of life doesn't make any money. And so they were constantly also trying to see if she would turn on her other compatriots. So it is kind of a scrapbook of someone's life in a really odd way, but one that you have to verify. And then also I think it's tough because you learn things from somebody's file that either maybe they didn't know, and certainly maybe their family doesn't know. And so there's also questions as a biographer about what to reveal and not to reveal. And when you offer somebody a sense of privacy that maybe they didn't have in their lives because of that, because that's just the ethical thing to do,
We have time for about 2 more. If anyone has any other questions, we can come back to you right here.
You tired of me yet, Ashley?
This is my mother-in-law, by the way. You're wondering about this.
So I have a question.
And also, you have met Queen Mother Moore, right?
Yes.
Yeah, she's met Queen Mother Moore. Yeah.
So I have a question about W.E.B. Du Bois, because not that they were around the same time. So he was middle of the road, but yet he went and did exactly what she's telling other people to do, and he left, renounced citizenship, and went to Ghana. So how does that play off with her? I'm just curious, because what was their relationship, and why didn't she follow him in doing that?
That's a great question. So I think she was constantly writing to him and telling him to get on board and to relinquish kind of his understandings. And you see Du Bois evolve, in that framework. She also was organizing with Shirley Graham Du Bois a lot in radical circles. So she had a relationship with his second wife who was also, I think, kind of in Du Bois's ear talking about this stuff. What's interesting is that, and one thing I didn't share when I was talking is that in much later in life, in the 1970s, is when she finally got to go to Africa, despite, idolizing it for all of these years. And in a matter of, a couple of years, she went to about 9 different countries, feted as the head of state for all of these different places. So Tanzania, Ghana, Uganda, where she gets a thing for Idi Amin. So it was a tough chapter to write. A thing for Idi Amin. I think she told your mother they were having an affair, right? That's what your mother believes. I don't know about that, but I think if it was allowed, it would have happened. But I say that all to say is that she had this very kind of essentialized, idealistic understanding of Africa for most of her life that was probably based in Garvey's ideals of Back to Africa. And when she got there, she was transformed. She understood certainly the beauty of it. She was very excited about all the decolonization struggles, but it was really sobering for her about the struggles that Black people were facing in all these different contexts. I mean, even much as she tried to ignore Idi Amin, she knew that genocide was taking place, right? And I think she became a little bit disenchanted with the idea that she could probably make a life there. And then there's just real, struggles. She did not have any money. She needed, by the end of her life, a lot of assistance just because she didn't take care of her health. So I think there were some real logistical issues to feeling like she could do that as well. She didn't have a partner at the end of her life. But when she feels, I talk about how overwhelmed she feels when she first steps foot there. But then by the time she ends these tours, she's a real different understanding, right, of what kind of Back to Africa means. And she spends time going to expat communities, but it doesn't quite sell her the way I think she thought it would.
Any last questions? I see this person right here, but you have one as well? Oh, sorry, I was just making sure. We can do these two and then wrap it up.
Hi, Ashley. I'm a friend of your mother-in-law's. I'm wondering, in the 21st century, there are at least as many different approaches to Black nationalism and Black freedom and Black Lives Matter and as there were during her lifetime. Yeah. So using the great history that you've set out here and what we've learned, where do we go from here? What lessons do we take and move forward with at this point?
So I think, one of the things that I really find fascinating about Black nationalism is it just reminds you to keep your political imagination broad, right? And I'm including myself in this, have been programmed to think that the only way we can organize ourselves, the only way we can govern ourselves, the only way we can understand citizenship, the only way we can understand community is through this order that has been handed down from us, right? And one of the things that Black nationalists do is remind us that, there's always another way. There's always another way to There's always another way to think about our relationship to other community. And, maybe there are some ideas they have because this is not working great for us, right? And so I think that looking at her and thinking about all the different iterations of how she understood how we could be separate and free is just a reminder to keep looking for that in our daily lives now. The other thing I will say is that she was not, like I said, she was not quote unquote educated, something that she had an inferiority complex about that, which, she talks about, or I talk about in the book when she's asked to speak places. But she was a student. She read with others, right? She would sit and they'd all read the same thing and they'd talk about it. She was deferent in what she did not know and an eager to learn more and more about what she wanted to. And then once she had the knowledge, whether that was her own personal experience or literal books, she opened it up to everybody. Like in her Philadelphia home, she literally used to leave the window open for activists just to climb in and out to the library, right? She used to leave cots out for them to rest. And we got some of our foremost radical thinkers from that who were afraid of her at first. So I say that all to say that I think she's a great model in how to be a thinking person. Because the mark of a thinking person is that you get new data and you change your mind, right? You should evolve in how you think about the world. You should evolve in what you think Black people's place is here. And she was not afraid to evolve. And I think that's especially important in this moment where a lot of this discourse is taking place online and somebody says one thing and somebody says the other thing, and you may have realized that you weren't right. I'm not talking about y'all folks, right? I'm talking about those other folks, of course. But people don't want to admit it, right? That they weren't informed correctly, or they got new information and maybe they should change their mind or adapt their view. So I think that she's a really great model in thinking through how to do that without entirely losing your value system, right? And so I think those are a couple of things we could take away.
And this will be our last question.
I thought that was a great last question, but it's too late. So I just want to point out that Cobra was founded across the street in the Reeves building, and I wonder if you could just sort of take us home with a discussion of Queen Mother's relationship to the modern reparations movement, particularly in Cobra.
Yeah, so Cobra is an organization that developed in the late 1980s, early 1990s, a combination of black lawyers and black leftists who were reviving the idea of a reparations movement, in part because we're kind of seeing a spike in black nationalism around that time, but also because there's new legislation coming out, particularly around paying victims of the Japanese internment camps, right? So it takes this moment where they're like, well, you know, you can do that, then maybe we have a new claim for doing this otherwise. So she was kind of the patron saint there. She not only would go to their conferences as much as she could, and by that point we're talking she's in her 90s, right? And they would literally, I talk about in the book how she would invite particularly the women to her room, and she would kind of gather them around and tell the stories about the founding of the reparations movement and think through how they could organize that, you know, going forward. And I would argue that them, and then there's a group called First Repair, I don't know if you know about this group as well, they are probably the two most lasting kind of modern day examples of reparations. First Repair is a great little network, and they have a north, south, east, and west chapter, and people do a range of things, from actually doing state-sponsored reparations activism. Some of it is filing lawsuits against individual companies that they know have wronged black folks. Some folks in the group are doing maybe more like commemorative things, monuments, museums, getting people to make apologies. So I think between Cobra and First Repair, you really see her philosophy of letting million flowers bloom, and how, you know, she definitely thought we should get a paycheck, but she also felt that we needed to move towards understanding that kind of psychic repair, the mental tax that it had taken to basically have your culture deprived. So there's that.
And with that, let's give it up one more time for Dr. Farmer. Thank you all so much for joining us for this discussion, and thank you, Dr. Farmer, for bringing this to our stage. I just want to remind you one more time that Queen Mother is here available for purchase. We know you can get the book anywhere, but we would really appreciate if you got it here tonight, if you do plan on getting the book. It's also a special opportunity as Dr. Farmer is here and will be signing copies. So with that, please make sure that you close out your tab before you leave tonight and tip your server if you did a good job. And the signing and book purchasing is going to be happening at this front table right here. And have a great rest of your night. Thank you.